Please pray with me. God of grace and God of hope, as we come together, may we be led by your Spirit in all things. May we hear the ways in which you whisper hope and healing and challenge and blessing into our lives. We pray all this with a spirit of expectation as we explore your word. Amen. So we begin the story with Jacob and his family at the Jabbok River. And the story begins, this morning's passage, with these words. Jacob took his family and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had, and he was left alone. So to understand what's going on in the story, we need to go back to the beginning when Jacob was born, and he was the second of two brothers. They were twins. Esau was born first. And the story says that holding his heel was Jacob. They were that closely connected. And the story, and in the culture of the time, whoever was the firstborn received the birthright of the father. All the rights and privileges and wealth of the father would go to the eldest son. And as the story unfolds, Jacob tricked his father Isaac, who was of great age and of poor sight. He tricked his father into thinking that he was his older brother, Esau. And so Isaac gave the birthright to Jacob, intended for his older brother. And once the birthright was given away, it could not be taken back, even though the father knew that he had been deceived by his youngest son. And Esau vowed revenge against his brother. And Jacob fled into the wilderness, a fugitive. And for over 20 years, Jacob lived his life on the run, always looking over his shoulder that Esau would come for his revenge. As a fugitive, Jacob made a life for himself. He married. He had children. They had children. He accumulated great wealth. But still he was a hunted man until he could no longer run. And it comes to this point in the story with Jacob having sent his family across the river, asking mercy upon his brother Esau. And Jacob was on the other side of the river, knowing that Esau waited for him in the morning with an army. And Jacob knew that he was about to be held accountable, that he could no longer run. We can imagine Jacob wrestling in the night, asking questions like, what have I done? Why have I made such a mess out of my life? We can imagine him wrestling through a fitful sleep. Have you ever felt that life hasn't gone according to plan? Perhaps like Jacob, we've made a choice that we wish we hadn't. Perhaps we've messed up and know that consequences are coming our way that we will simply have to deal with. In a previous church setting, I walked alongside a man who made a mess of his life. He made a choice with profound consequences. And it became a public story. For several days, it was on the front page of our local newspaper, telling all the details about the choice that he had made. His wife divorced him. He lost his profession. He was facing possible jail time. And he wondered if his children would ever speak to him again. Sometimes we make a mess out of things, like my friend and like Jacob. Sometimes, however, the difficulties that visit us have nothing to do with choices we've made. Perhaps we receive a difficult diagnosis, or people we care deeply about, family and friends, are struggling, and we wish we could take their pain away, but we can't. Or a person may find oneself taking a principled stand, feeling like, as with Jacob, we are all alone. I think of Dr. Martin Luther King, who was threatened and attacked by segregationists on one hand, who, as he called for an end to racial profiling and through the law of the land at that time of segregation. And then I think of the moderate and liberal white clergy in Birmingham saying that he was going too fast and he needed to slow down. Those on the right wanted his head. Those on the left were critical. We can imagine that Dr. King often felt very much alone. In 1956, while Dr. King was away on a trip, a bomb was placed on his front porch. While inside, his wife Coretta and their infant daughter Yolanda were to be found. The bomb exploded the front half of their home, and miraculously, Coretta and Yolanda were not injured because they were in the back of the home as Coretta prepared her baby for sleep. We can imagine how Martin and Coretta felt very much alone that night and in the days ahead. Which begs the question, have you and I ever felt alone? Have we ever found ourselves awake at 3 in the morning, working our worry beads, worrying about what tomorrow might hold? Worrying about a choice we made that we know there will be consequences, or worrying about someone that we love, or taking a stand and knowing that we will not be found to be popular. In Jacob's case, his torment was of his own making. At 3 a.m., he finds himself in the midst of a fitful sleep, and in verse 24, we are told that while Jacob was alone, a man wrestled with him in the night. The story at this point is foggy. The details unclear. Is it a dream or is it real? Is Jacob wrestling with his conscience or with a representative from God or with God's self? We hear these words. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." The gift, the blessing that Jacob receives is a new name, a new identity. He is no longer Jacob, he is now Israel, which means he who has striven with God and with humanity and has prevailed. So what does this curious story teach us? Number one, that Jacob in his desperation reaches out to God and won't let God go until he, Jacob, is blessed. And more so, the nature of God is to be gracious, to extend grace even to an unsavory, unlovable, unlikely person like Jacob. And if God could be faithful to an unsavory character like Jacob, then why not me and why not you? That God is faithful to us when we awaken at 3 in the morning and work our worry beads. That as God was faithful to Jacob, then why not us? The good news in this story is that as we walk through life, as we deal with our struggles, as we deal with the choices that we have made or circumstances beyond our control, as we wrestle with what we believe or don't believe about our relationship with God, the gift, the lesson, the invitation in this story is to believe that God also accompanies us and blesses us and graces us with a new identity, a new way of looking at ourselves and looking at the world. Do we believe that to be true? Do we believe that to be true? In her book, God, Improv, and the Art of Living, by Marianne McKibben Dana, the author has a chapter entitled Seeing Defeat Differently. She writes in reference to a challenge in her life. She writes, I stopped short of saying, I'm glad I faced this difficulty. It's a bridge too far to say that the pain I experienced was a good thing. Still, it gave me an opening to improvise. She writes, an improviser learns to see defeats and difficulties with new eyes, to be attentive to unexpected opportunities, even when things have gone terribly wrong. And then the author goes on to say, this chapter is a perilous one to write. We can't do the work of making meaning to one another. Each of us has to do it for ourselves. But she says sometimes tragedies deeply defy any convenient and tidy reframing. And we know that is true. They defy easy reframing. Back to my friend. Waiting trial several months, wondering if he would go to jail. He wrestled with his own conscience. He wrestled to make sense out of the choice, the fateful choice that he had made. He went to therapy, trying to understand the pattern that his life had acquired, trying to make of himself a better person, to make of himself a new man, to understand himself and to make better choices in the future, and to believe that he was worthy of being loved by God. Marianne Dana continues, I can only say that sometimes, with eyes wide open and clutching yes and, we can peer through a tiny hole in the rubble of our lives and muse, I wonder what would happen if I poked it, if I looked for an opening like this. She ends by saying, I find it energizing when plan A falls apart, to be defiant and stubborn and by one's actions say, we're going to make something redemptive out of this mess. We're going to make something redemptive out of this mess. That was the choice facing my friend, who had lost seemingly everything. Could someone like he be redeemed? It took him a long time to be able to say yes. He was worthy of being loved by God. Gradually, he learned to love himself again. And in time, his children would talk to him. I wonder what would happen if I looked and I poked life just a little bit and looked for more possibilities, the author asks. What do you think? Can even the messiest of lives be redeemed? When we have messed up, anyone here ever mess up? Is it just me? It's a human condition, right? Sometimes we mess up big time, and the consequences are real. Sometimes we mess up a little bit. Do we feel like we're worthy of being redeemed? On the night when Dr. King's home was destroyed and his family nearly killed, Dr. King stood on the front porch, the shattered front porch of his home. A group of armed supporters seeking vengeance on Dr. King's behalf gathered outside. Dr. King addressed the crowd and the reporters, repeating his message of nonviolence. He said, if you have weapons, take them home. If you do not have them, please do not seek them. We cannot solve this problem through violence. We must meet violence with nonviolence. Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Pray for them that deceitfully use you. Remember, this movement will not stop because God is with us. And one by one, the people laid down their weapons and they went home. I don't think for a moment that God caused the bombing, nor that God causes the difficulties in our lives to make a point. Rather, when dealing with difficulties, when like Jacob we wrestle at 3 a.m. in the morning with our fears and our worries, we are faced all with this question. We are faced with this question. Now what? What's our next move? Mary Ann McKibben Dana concludes her chapter with this. An improvising God calls us to see what we can see, the situation right in front of us, no matter how surprising, annoying, or downright deplorable, and find the best yes and. To find the best yes and that is possible. Sometimes that's the best we can do, and that is enough. Whatever you're dealing with in your life, or people that are close to your heart, whatever mistakes we've made, or whatever we're dealing with due to circumstances beyond our control, we are offered a window, perhaps just a glimpse, of what our life can be when we claim that God accompanies us and when we wrestle with God, when we hold on to the possibility that we will be blessed. It's not easy, but this is the good news. Thanks be to God, and may God's people say.